Welcome to the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. My name is Katie Dodd, and I am a nutrition entrepreneur. But here's the catch. I have a full-time traditional dietitian job. My entrepreneurial endeavors are my side hustle. I've been making six figures through my job and side hustle doing things that I love. If I can do it, you can too. This podcast is for dietitians, interns, and students who want to be inspired to start or perfect the side hustle of their dreams. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the 58th episode of the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast, Tips for Effective Writing. Today I will be interviewing Cole Theobald. Cole is a dietetic intern at Oregon Health Sciences University and a freelance writer who completed a minor in writing as well as a certificate in scientific, technical, and professional communications during his undergraduate work at Oregon State University. He has dabbled in many kinds of writing, from journalism and magazine article writing to technical writing and advertisement writing. And through his courses, he has also published for a food writing blog, Buckteenth Magazine, as well as 1853 and a Corvallis focused blog. And plus, he's already written a couple of amazing blog articles for my website, The Geriatric Dietitian. So I am so excited to have Cole here today to share his writing expertise with the Dietitian Side Hustle community. Welcome, Cole. Would you like to share a few words before we get started?
Thank you. It's super awesome to be here and to talk about something that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, awesome. So let's dive in. First off, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into writing?
So I first started out I'm from Corvallis, Oregon, which is where Oregon State University is located. So I definitely went into college there thinking like, oh, I'm going to be, I don't know, a pharmacist like my dad, or I'm going to go into medicine. I definitely wanted to go into allied health, that's for sure. But then I figured out I've always been sort of interested in nutrition. And then I learned like what dietetics was. And I sort of jumped at the opportunity and switched my major, and everything was great. And then as I was going through, general courses that you have to take for all the classes, I took a creative writing class. I believe it was Intro to Fiction Writing. And I figured out that I really liked fiction writing. Certainly in high school, where we had to do a 5-paragraph essay where you take a book and you run through it. That certainly wasn't nearly as interesting to me as the fiction writing aspect. And then I figured out that that same professor that I really liked was teaching a food writing course in the next winter. So when I took that course, and I was like, oh my God, I can write creatively while also promoting like a magazine article, promoting food and nutrition information. And so I sort of took that and ran with it, and eventually ended up, like Katie said, declaring a minor in writing, and then later on a certificate in scientific, technical, and professional communications, which is just a big fancy way of saying I took one extra class and was able to add a certificate.
Awesome. I think that's the great thing about college too. Sometimes we find random things we never knew we'd be into. Like that's actually how I became a nutrition major, was I took a random nutrition class because I thought it'd be easy, and now here we are. So that is awesome. So could you start off by sharing some tips that you have for writers before they even get started with writing?
So I definitely think one of the biggest things that you could do is ask yourself, it gets easier over time, of course, but when you're just starting out, you want to sort of ask yourself 3 massive questions. And it's first, you want to ask, what are you trying to write? Then you ask, who are you writing for? And then lastly, you ask, why are you writing this piece in particular? So this will all give you like a good guide for how you're going to create the piece. First off, what are you writing? You're going to ask yourself, am I writing an email? Am I writing a press release? Am I writing a blog article? Am I writing a book? And those are all going to have different formats for how you're going to actually make the article look. And you can do that to sort of give yourself an organizational framework to build off of, especially since, all writing is super different and nothing looks the same. Even within genres, things don't look exactly the same, but that's where the next question comes in. Who are you writing for? So this gives you information about like you have to figure out what your ideal audience is. So if you're writing for kids, it's going to look a lot different than if you're writing for your boss or something. If you're writing even within genre, if you're writing a magazine article for a general population of people who don't really understand nutrition and food science, you'll write differently than if you were writing to a magazine, a science magazine, and even then still different from if you were writing to a science magazine specifically on the topic of food and nutrition, because then you can assume that everyone there already has sort of a baseline level of knowledge and I guess not literacy, but like ability to read and comprehend higher order concepts, you know.
Yeah.
And then lastly, sort of why are you writing the piece in particular? The way I see it, everyone has like a different amount of types of writing, but the way I see it, there's three. There's informative, there's persuasive, and then there's creative. And they're all like, if you're trying to tell someone about something happening in the future, or if you're writing like a news article, that's more informative than let's say like an opinion piece or like even an advertisement. That's persuading you to look at this, think my way, stuff like that. And both of those are distinct from creative writing, which can be like poetry or a novel or even like on a recipe. You know how sometimes they have like a section beforehand where they're like telling you about their day. That's more creative writing than it is informative or persuasive. Even still, there's like, you know, there's like mixing in between the three. There's like a recipe. What recipe doesn't want you to cook it? It's trying to persuade you to cook. In something like a book, if you were, say, reading a book about like the ocean and ships and it had like a nautical theme, you might inadvertently learn about things to do with ships, like how rigging works or what the sails, the difference between port and starboard. I can't say that I know that, but I'm sure if I read more nautical novels, I would.
Awesome. Awesome. And I love that. And I think that's something a lot of people don't think about before they start putting pen to paper is really have that self-reflection of like, okay, wait a minute, the what, the who, and the why. So I think that's really helpful. So what tips do you have for actually doing the writing?
So I think definitely the first thing that I would say is, you know, practice your grammar and your punctuation and your tenses and make sure that that's all squared away and solid in your mind, because when you're reading through something and it's not clear the way that things, like if it doesn't sound conversational in a way, it can seem stilted and sort of take the reader out of whatever they're reading and make them less interested and engaged, less likely to finish following through the article itself. To that same point, I would say that sentence fluency and complexity it's also a very important thing. If you're having the same kind of sentence over and over, it can be pretty jarring to read and sort of boring at the same time. So like if you have a bunch of sentences that are just one clause, like subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, whatever, period. Subject, verb, whatever, period. Subject, verb, whatever, period. It gets repetitive and you sort of stop wanting to read more of it. And then on the opposite end of that, if you have a sentence that's like a billion clauses long and there's just like semicolons, colons, commas, ellipses, like all linking everything together, it can get, you lose track of where you are. And then you have to, I don't know, you have to like go all the way back and read through and like try and find where the sentence even started. And that can also take someone out of reading an article or anything really. And I think that blending the two together creates a much more dynamic experience that can keep people more interested in continuing to read what you've written, which is, I mean, why are you writing in the first place if you don't want someone to read it?
Yeah.
Past that, I think that, hold on. Let me find what I wanted to say. Okay. Lastly, I think it's important to find your own voice when you're writing. I definitely think that it's difficult to pretend to be someone else. Certainly, it's something that you can learn to do. And if you're doing something like a creative writing where you're writing as a character, trying to speak in, say, 3 or 4 different voices, it can be a skill that you can learn. But if you're starting out writing a scientific article, for example, you really want to find your own voice and your own style of writing, because if you don't, it can come off sort of stilted and awkward because you're not writing comfortably. You're not writing like yourself. And if you're not writing like yourself, you're not really doing as well as you could, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love that. I love finding your own voice. And sometimes we want to try to act like we're someone else, but just be your authentic self and it's going to come through in your writing and probably have a better reading experience. And I also like the point you had about trying to make sure that we keep people interested in reading. It's something to kind of step back and think about, like, okay, is the way I'm writing conducive to making sure people want to keep reading this versus like, just looking at them and be like, that's great, and just move on. So awesome tips. So next, can you share some tips for, okay, we figured out what we're going to write. We've written or whatever it is. What are some tips that you have for editing? Just kind of going through and making sure it's all good.
Yeah, so I think this also applies to, any sort of the writing process, really any process of work, period, is, there's this concept called flow where you're feeling really in the zone and you just want to keep plugging away because what you're doing right here is great. You're doing great work and it's coming out better than you could have ever hoped. And that definitely happens with writing, but it's not something that you can really like rely on. So, because if it's not there, it's not there. And if you're trying to force it to happen, it's not gonna, So I think definitely structuring yourself to be able to take breaks and work when you are able to, it's definitely valuable because if you're like trying to force yourself, it's going to come across in what you write. It's going to be less well written, and then you're going to have to further edit it more. And if you're already editing something, you might mess up. You might make a wrong edit and make it worse accidentally. And on top of that, like, writing is supposed to be fun, And if you're like forcing yourself to have fun, are you really having fun,
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. No, I love that. And that's really important, is sometimes we just need to take a step away. We need to take a break and come back to it when we're more in that zone and in that flow. So awesome. So
to that point, I think that taking a break can also be good, like for a longer term sort of break. So like if you're like, I don't know, if you've just finished a piece of work and you want to really edit it for like ideas and content and structure, you can take a few days away and come back with fresh eyes. So what I mean by that is like you're not attached to what you've written anymore. Because if you're too attached, you might not want to make some harsher or more drastic revisions than you normally would, because you feel so emotionally involved in the things that you've written.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. Awesome. So this has been so helpful with sharing some tips about writing and editing. And I do have one last question just for fun, because you're actually the first dietetic intern I've ever had on the podcast. So I just want you to share something for fun. So what has been your favorite part about being a dietetic student and or an intern?
I think definitely not to come across as like a one-track mind kind of guy, but being able to blend my interests in such a distinct way. In all of my writing classes, I've been able to bring nutrition into the forefront. And in many of my nutrition classes, when we've had to, construct papers and consumer papers and lit reviews, I've been able to bring my passion for writing into that. Yeah. So I definitely think that, in general, for anything, it's always best if you can find multiple aspects that you enjoy so that you can enjoy both of them at once, and it'll be even more fun than it was individually,
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a great message, not just for students, but for dietitians. Yeah. And I think that's a cool thing too about, becoming a dietitian or being a dietitian is there's so many cool things we could do. And sometimes we think what we do for a career or a side hustle or whatever has to be strictly within a box of I have to do clinical or I have to do food service. But no, you can do crazy fun things. You could be a writer, you can be an editor, you could be a blogger. There's lots of possibilities with things we could do within our profession. So awesome. So if you guys want more information on how to improve your writing, be sure to check out an awesome training that Cole did where he actually shares some examples of his own writing. So this is kind of like today's podcast, but a presentation where he's sharing a screen with a little PowerPoint. So if you click on my link in the show notes and sign up, we will send you a 25-minute video training and a one-page handout all about, tips for improving your writing. So Cole, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can people find you online?
I am on LinkedIn under Cole Theobald, Theobald. I'm also somewhat on Twitter at COLE1662. I suppose you could also find me on Facebook at my name. And I think if you go through any of those options, I think I'll see it. I'll probably see it if you want to contact me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the episode. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening today. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, guys. Be sure to head on over to the Dietitian Side Hustle website at dietitiansidehustle.com and check out our coaching page to learn about all the ways that we can work together. Have an amazing day, and I'm so proud of you for taking the initiative to listen to this podcast. Now go out there and get it done. Bye, guys.